this session. Thank you. So delighted to see everyone, and thank you for joining us for event fundraising in a post-pandemic world. What I thought we would do today is I did prepare some slides that I thought would be helpful in laying a foundation for what we are seeing out there in terms of events, and then to offer some suggestions, recommendations for what you all might consider doing as you take on your own events for your respective organizations. But I do want to leave the bulk of our time together to answer specific questions that you all have. And prior to today's session, I did receive a couple of specific questions that I think you all would find helpful in discussing. So let me begin by sharing my screen and launching a very brief PowerPoint. I can't find some PowerPoint. Okay. So to one second. I need to take this, I think, out of slide sharing mode. Okay. Try it again. Thank you. Okay, great. Can everyone see the? Great. Okay. Thank you. So I thought I would start by just kind of quickly reflecting on where we were in terms of events, both pre-COVID and during COVID. I think there's some things that lessons learned and things that have been brought through to what I would describe again as post-COVID events. But I think to reflect on pre-COVID, people were actively out and about and eager to socialize. And what we would observe, I would say, here in the greater Boston area, I'm not sure if it applies to all of you in the communities where you live, but a pretty active spring and fall event season, whereby in order to stand out, you needed to make sure your event was not competing with a particular other event, and being thoughtful in terms of how your event, in terms of the time of year, played into your larger fundraising plan. I would say quickly for Lenny's Zachem Fund, pre-COVID, we did have one very large event in the spring, and then coincidentally, we did have a virtual event in the fall, which we call our no-show ball, and it's something that we've been doing every year. In terms of in-person events, in some cases, it was for some more about being a place where they could be seen and be seen as much as wanting to raise money for an organization. And as I'm sure we've all experienced, where friends would people would purchase a sponsorship or tickets and then turn to their friends to invite them, and in turn the friends would ask others to their own event. So it was almost like a quid pro quo, which I think, while helpful in raising money for organizations, it did not necessarily ensure that people would continue to support the organization beyond the events. You typically would see, if there was a silent or live auction, items that could be somewhat high price in value, and could be anything from actual physical things to experiential. And while those events raised a lot of money, it required a lot of money for those events to be successful. So what we describe as a high cost per dollar raised. During the pandemic, as we all know, we had to be socially distanced. And in some respects, that made it easier for friends to invite friends to one another's events and to expose them to an organization's work. I think one of the great things about the COVID events were that they were short and concise programming and allowed for people to participate in those events from the safety and comfort of their home. But also, as some of these events were pre-recorded, it also allowed for people to, or recorded live events that were recorded and then lived on organizations' websites or YouTube. It allowed people to view or engage in those events at their leisure. I think the other thing that was great, one of the great things about these events during COVID, it required all of us to be creative and to think outside of the box. We had to pivot quickly, and that creativity, I think, was welcomed by our donors and who found it refreshing. But it also required us to constantly improve or evolve our events as we got better with technology, as we got a sense of what people were interested in and would be compelled to support. Events during COVID were also easier to raise money for need because it was the need was immediate. The need was recognizable by everyone who was on the Zoom call. And people felt a need to do something. And during COVID, where again, we were not physically connecting with one another, these events really brought and created a sense of community in a way we really haven't seen prior to. We were able to do these events on a much more modest budget, which meant that it was a lower cost per dollar raised. And a lot of organizations saw a significant increase in revenue generation. I think certainly more revenue than they expected from virtual events. When now, I guess if we could safely call, we're in a post-COVID world. While I think we're seeing an ongoing competition among organizations, we also all recognize that we're in a new world that we need to be constantly evolving and willing to adapt to the environment in which we're in. As we saw last year with Omicron, that required people, all organizations and people to pivot, and whether it was in terms of COVID testing prior to or making space for people at events to be comfortable. We've also seen that at least in the various events I've attended and participated in planning myself, that not all people are interested in attending in-person events, whether it's because of COVID concerns, or I think that from one lesson learned from COVID events held during COVID is that the time commitment and or expense involved with people attending in-person events, people are starting to rethink that a bit and to pause and decide whether it's the best use of their time to attend an event, or for the cost, whether it's best making a gift directly to an organization as opposed to the added cost of attending. What we've also seen is an expectation, whether it be driven by the board of organizations, boards, or others, that event planning in this sort of post-COVID world be done more modest budgets, which then is impacts in some cases, I would say, the experience of an event, particularly if people were used to and looked forward to returning to an event they enjoyed attending pre-COVID, and it's not, doesn't have the look and the feel of the event as it did before. And so in some cases that has, I think, what we've witnessed impacted not only the number of people attending, but also the amount of money being raised. So this is sort of where we turns to the point of our time here is to talk about what can we do, what's in our power, our abilities within our budget to do to host or put on a successful fundraising event. One thing that I have certainly learned over this past year of now hosting 2 events for the Lenny Zakem Fund, it's really important in order for an event to be successful that we have buy-in and support from our board and key donors early on in the planning. If we're not finding that people are really enthusiastic and eager to support, whether it be philanthropically, getting their friends to attend, and promoting event, then we need to pause and try to do some course correction before we start to actively promote the event. I think it's certainly important that before any event gets widely broadcast, that we really have clarity in terms of what are the goals for the event, not just the fundraising goals, but also for the attendance and exactly who you hope to have in the room and what you hope to do with them when they're there. Certainly, it's never, in my opinion, never too early to promote an event with a save the date, whether it's by email. We've done that with postcards. I've been certainly the recipient of many postcard save the dates and electronic with links to provide more information about that event, whether it be sponsorship opportunities, logistics about where the event's being held, and also to be able to list key supporters, sponsors of your event. And as they just previously mentioned, getting your board members and key donors to help in the promotion of the event. What I experienced in my time as a fundraiser is at different organizations and as a consultant is that board members and key donors want to be helpful, but they don't always feel comfortable about soliciting gifts. And so to figure out ways to empower them to be able to talk about the organization and the fundraising need, whether that be with talking points that you can share with them, provide them with regular updates about how things are going with regard to fundraising. And it could also be something along the lines of one thing that I create, and we can certainly talk about, is whenever we're thinking about a fundraising event, or even our annual no-show ball that we continue to do, which is again is a virtual event in name only, is we're creating a gift table or a gift pyramid where if we know our fundraising goal is say $100,000, trying to identify the various sponsorship levels or gift levels that we could or hope to expect to be able to meet that goal. And then for each gift level, identifying people or foundations or corporations who we think would be willing to support us at those levels. And again, we can talk about that a little bit more. One thing that we, the Lenny Zakem Fund, can certainly do more of, and we're happy to do more of, is promoting your respective events. We have our website. We have, like all of you, our social media pages that we can use to promote your upcoming events. And we also have and are sending out regular e-newsletters that go to not only our current and former grantee partners, but to our donors. And so, again, welcome any of you who wish to share with us the details of your event. We're happy to then share with our broader community. Sorry, I don't know. Okay. One recommendation, I'm not sure who's unmuted. If you could please mute yourself. That might be. Thank you. Thank you. When you're thinking about a fundraising goal for your event, I would caution against setting too high a goal or relying too heavily on any one event to meet your overall fundraising revenue for the year. And so my recommendation is 10%. You might find that 15% of your overall fundraising goal is reasonable. And again, if you create a gift pyramid or gift table, as I just described, that can certainly help you to think about what a reasonable fundraising goal is. But what I would caution against, or things that we've certainly learned, whether it be the Lenny Zakem Fund or other organizations I've been involved with, is that it's hard to replicate or build upon fundraising success of an event from one year to the next. And so you don't want to set the bar too high. It's hard to replace a major donor who can't make the event. I have certainly seen that at organizations who, whether they're putting on a $100,000 or $1 million event, if you've got one or two key donors who you're hoping that they'll be there, and for some reason they can't make it, then you've got to figure out how to replace that missing revenue. I would also suggest that having a more modest or reasonable revenue goal for your event will allow you to use the event to engage your donors, expose them to your work, and then through post-event outreach communication, solicit people for a second and potentially a higher gift. We'll get into this a little bit more, but events are the most expensive way for an organization to fundraise. And so we can talk about what a cost per dollar raise looks like, what a reasonable cost per dollar raise looks like, and what makes sense for each of your organizations. Certainly the biggest and hidden cost of any event is the staff and volunteer time that's dedicated to an event. And you want to make sure that whether it's a staff or even a volunteer, that people are being deployed in the most efficient way possible. And especially for volunteers, that they're feeling really good about the time that they're committing to the event, that they're feeling appreciated, and feeling that their involvement is needed and appreciated, and also enabling the organization to carry forth a successful event. I have just a couple more slides and we can go into conversation. The post-event is just as important as the event itself. And I think figuring out ways to engage non-event attendees through post-event communications, and even requesting for in-person meetings or Zoom meetings is really important. It's a way for you to share that not only the highlights of the event and how much money was raised, but to hopefully generate some excitement and interest in them to want to learn more about the organization and want to be more supportive. In lieu of a larger fundraising event, and obviously the size of your fundraising event can be defined in various ways, whether it be by the amount of money you're looking to fundraise or the number of people. You might consider hosting smaller fundraisers within people's homes, or what is commonly, another idea is what we are commonly referred to as dialogue dinners. So whereby someone is hosting a small dinner for maybe 20 people around a single table that is involves the leader of the organization, perhaps one or two board members, and then either be existing or donors or prospective donors around the table, talking about an aspect of your work, perhaps that might be tied, for example, to a current social issue that is currently in the news, whereby you as the organization can demonstrate how you're addressing this social issue within your community, and why people's support is needed. And while a dialogue dinner might not be the moment where you're specifically making that ask of individuals, it is a way, again, to lay a foundation for people to understand your work. And then from there, ask for a one-on-one meeting to have a deeper conversation about how that individual might or couple might be philanthropically supportive. The next bullet, I'm sure many of you are already doing this, but cannot underscore this enough. I know that some of you out there have asked about how do you build that pipeline and fill that pipeline of potential new donors, particularly people who are not familiar with your organization or not familiar with your organization or not in your community. And so looking to become actively involved with community foundations, I think, is very important. The Boston Foundation, for example, hosts a series of lectures throughout the year that are free for people, and has an annual meeting that is well attended by not only other nonprofits, but individuals within the community who have financial wherewithal and to support organizations, but also interest in wanting to be supporters, partners, allies with organizations doing the important work on the ground. Instead of a silent or a live auction, you might consider Fund a Need. It's a way to, and I'll go into in the next slide, just a sort of comparison between silent live auction versus fund a need. But whether your organization does an auction or fund the need, I think it's always really important in advance of the that particular aspect of the event to secure donors at various levels as a way to ensure the success of that particular aspect of your fundraising, and to inject and maintain enthusiasm throughout. So I'm sure you all have been to events where you have a live auction going on and there's crickets when somebody's asking for the audience for a 10 or 5,000 or even $1,000 gift. And so going to your lead donors, your board members in advance to ask if they would be willing to commit to support at a particular level will allow you in the moment to turn to those individuals. And if they have their paddles, they can raise their paddles to express their support. And again, it can allow for, especially if there's a moment where the fund the need or auction has been stalled, to get that kind of back on track and to get people excited about wanting to raise their paddles as well. In terms of the silent or live auctions versus fund the need, auctions can be considered competitive, and that could be good in some ways, especially if two people are vying for the same item or experience. And in those occasions where you might, if it's saying, for example, dinner for two, or a small dinner party, if there's an opportunity to make that opportunity available to two people, if they were to offer up a similar bid, that's great. But auctions can also discourage people from giving, whereas a fund a need, everybody can participate at whatever dollar amount that they're most comfortable. The auction, it's really about, is this particular item of interest to a person? And is it something unique enough that they're willing to bid on? Or is it something that they could easily go out and buy themselves? Whereas I was going to also say that, as I just mentioned the previous slide, it can be hard to build and sustain momentum during an auction, particularly during a silent auction. One other thing that I think is really important to remember is that money raised during a silent or live auction, only the money raised above the fair market value of the item is considered tax deductible. And even though the organization gets the money that is for each item, whether or not you even hit the fair market value, you really, I think, to make it a win-win for an individual and the organization, it's got to be some item where they're bidding over and above the fair market value, so there's some tax deductibility aspect of their gift to you. Whereas with a fund a need, it's 100% of the gift is tax deductible. And as we know, people are there at the event to support the organization and not necessarily motivated by an auction item. So we want to make, especially if somebody is there as a guest of someone, you want to give them that opportunity to be philanthropically supportive. And as an organization with a fund a need, you can offer specific examples of how each gift can help an organization, making a more compelling case for support. So a gift of $50 can help us do X versus a gift of $1,000. And so people can see how a gift can be immediately put to work by the organization. And then finally, with silent or live auctions, just the added cost or work involved in getting the item to the the eventual winner can be just as labor intensive as having secured that auction item donation, gift or item donation in the first place. So I'm going to pause right there. I do have two questions, but I would love to also see everybody's faces. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll put this in the chat. This question or comment was submitted by Tracy, who I know is here with us today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and again, put this in the chat. And then I am going to stop speaking and ask Tracy if she would like to just elaborate a little bit more on what her experience was, and then maybe we can all talk about it a little bit. And I have some ideas myself.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, the question I sent was basically my organization had for a number of years put on this big auction event. And when I started, we realized that it really didn't make much money. Like, it was a ton of work and it was a lot of marketing, but at the end, we didn't make much money at all for all the work and effort and everything else. So the pandemic assisted us in making a change to how we approach that, since we couldn't hold it anyway. And one of our largest, most consistent funders offered to have, they called it a fundraiser. And so they have a lovely home and they invited their friends. And it was exactly that dynamic you were speaking to, where, I mean, Molly said at one point, she said, well, I've given to plenty of their events, so they can come and give you some money. And, you know, I mean, in lieu of anything else, I mean, it was certainly very generous. And we did that and made more money in one night than we made in 4 or 5 of those big auctions. And the effort on my part was significantly less. And so obviously that was pretty attractive, but it's so much is out of our control. And it feels like it's much more about the relationships of those particular donors to each other. I mean, literally, there was one donation that was a competition between 2 people. It had nothing to do with us. It was like, oh, how much is he giving? Oh, I'm going to double what he's giving. I'm like, okay, cool. So anyway, just to be able to then anniversary that, I don't even know. Like, they're changing their home, they're moving. It's a weird place. So any ideas I feel like it would be better. I can't. And people to support us specifically. So anyway, that's what we're dealing with.
Thank you, Tracy. And I appreciate you providing more detail about what transpired at the event itself. It's partly, you know, while the hosts were doing a good deed by raising money for you all, this idea of competition and it being not being about your organization, but being about them and trying to outdo one another. So feels like there's like education that needs to take place first and foremost, not just about Cape and Art Haven, but what your goals are for the event. And is there anybody who was at that event, do you think that you could turn to, or with the help of the former host, to ask if they would be willing to host an event at their home?
Yeah, and actually it was funny because we did, of course, present about the organization, and they took care to invite people who were interested in artists themselves and all that sort of thing. But this year, yeah, I because a couple of people that came, I know, like, we may not hang, but I know them, we're on other boards together, things like that. And I think we just got caught up in a busy fundraising year, because in my area specifically, the library is raising like multi-millions. And the friend that I did ask, because Molly, the fundraiser, the woman who had the event, did suggest asking someone else, as you just have. And they just couldn't, there was like this fatigue going on. Everyone had been asked to host for, if it wasn't the library, it was this, for this other thing. And it just, because we're smaller, and it's a small pool, it feels like it's really hard to wedge in there to become one of those after that inaugural event. I kind of hope like, cool, we'll be on this track, and maybe we just have to work harder to do that. I don't know.
Certainly what you just described too, in terms of the competition in the community, is real. And have you tried having just some maybe follow-up conversations with the people who attended to, or even sending out a communication with them to reflect on the event that took place, expressing your gratitude for their support, and noting there's a lot of competition in our community for philanthropic support, and to express your concerns about not getting, being left out, and the value that you all provide. And I know that you all just relocated, and I'm sure that comes with some costs, some expected and some unexpected.
We reached out. I would say I certainly could have done a better job with the level of the conversation with the donors. I mean, I did a follow-up letter, especially for anyone who donated, because a significant number of the people did, like most everyone did in some way. So we followed up, and some, like I said, we knew, and some I met from that event. So I did speak with them. But I do think we can still, because it's a small community, it's not like they're gone. I think I could do a better job of, perhaps, as you alluded to, using the move as a lever to initiate conversation again, thank them for that ability, being able to meet them, for taking a risk, or not taking a risk before them jumping in to support us when they did. And maybe now that I've actually moved and installed the floor and the sink, and we can, I can do that, because I know I could have done more for that.
And I don't want you to get too down on yourself or hard on yourself, because I feel that we can always do more. What you this event you just described, and I think this is one reason why even us at the Lenny Zakem Fund are trying to figure out what role do events play for us, and do we shift to having more direct one-on-one or smaller events with our donors, to be able to talk specifically to them about not only what our needs are, but what kind of impact that they could have with us. And I feel like that is, speaking as executive director now, the best use of my time, and I think would pays dividends over the longer term. And when we think as well about for some of the I guess more wealthier donors, where their money comes from, it's certainly having money at their disposal in terms of, that they could write a check, but there's also appreciated stock that they might be giving, donor advised funds, which is probably one of the largest resources that a lot of people have, where they park their money in donor advised funds, and it's hidden to the it's hidden in terms of one knowing about it, or even knowing how much they have in a donor advised fund, in that we could Google or look up where somebody lives and get a sense of their house, and we could look on LinkedIn and see where they might be working and get a sense of what their net worth might be. But in terms of the money in a donor advised fund, there's no way for us to know if there's money there or to get access to it unless somebody acknowledges that they actually do have a donor advised fund.
Right.
So part of it is in these conversations also is learning what else from a philanthropic perspective or nonprofit, what other organizations they typically support, where in your case, Cape Ann ranks among their philanthropic priorities. Is there an opportunity with further engagement or exposure to what you all are doing at Cape Ann that they might want to be more philanthropically supportive? And if they could make a gift this year, what that potentially could be. I think that people welcome that sort of direct conversation, and will be hopefully honest with you and honest with themselves about I hadn't given any thought to it, but art is something that I've always been passionate about, but I didn't realize that Cape Ann needed X, Y, or Z, or I didn't know this, that, and the other thing. And yes, I'll make a gift to you this year, but I can certainly see myself, because I've got a couple of other pledges or commitments that I need to pay off this year. So I could see be in a position next year to make a larger gift to you.
But that specific conversation, that just resonates. It makes so much more sense to me, allocating time to get those conversations rather than planning, for us anyway, because of our scale, for us planning a big event. It seems like it's kind of shown for us that's more impactful. So maybe just now that we've moved, picking a few key people that maybe seemed friendlier or already gave or something like that to start. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I know I received an email from Joan. So Joan had a question about cost per dollar raised for events. And if there's some guidelines that you could follow, right, in your own fundraising. Right. Okay. So yes and no. And I hate to answer your question that way. But there's so many factors that are involved. So certainly you could look at your you could easily identify the cost of food, the cost of rent, event space, cost of if you had a printed invitation, all those costs you could certainly identify, and then looking at what you want to raise, right? And the industry standard, as I understand it, is 20 cents per dollar raised. but that is like really highly efficient. That's an organization that has like dedicated staff to it. That is, number of elements or factors involved. So I would say if any of you on the screen, including ourselves, we're doing ourselves at Lenny's Acom Fund, we're doing that. Like, we're, I give you an A+. But I think to be more realistic, it's probably going to be somewhere like probably 40 cents on the dollar. So that's where you can, in terms of setting a fundraising goal, looking at against your revenue, your expenses, and having a conversation with yourself, with your board, is this does this investment in this event make sense? And so when I said in my presentation earlier that it's not just about the event itself, it's about the post event. So that event can get people in the door who've never heard about the History Project, or maybe they heard about it, but are curious to learn more. And maybe they're not going to give then, but it's an opportunity for you to use that event as a springboard for deeper engagement. And so that cost of feeding that person certainly can pay off, but it requires that a very consistent approach to engagement.
Is it okay if I, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, just first of all. And this is helpful. I think we're a small organization. I think we're probably all small organizations. And we've been doing the same kind of gala light event for about the last dozen years or so, where we give an award to someone, we have tickets, there's like hors d'oeuvres, a very short program. It's not a sit-down dinner. But we do hold it in, actually, we hold it in the St. Botolph Club in Boston. So it looks fancier than it is, honestly. And so that event, we usually bring in around $20,000, give or take. And it costs us around between $5,000 and $6,000 per year. I've been thinking a lot about staff time. We started doing this event when we were an entirely volunteer-driven organization. And I'm not saying that volunteers don't cost anything, but there's, the real cost of salary of the staff involved now, versus the time that, board members and other volunteers were donating. What I'm trying to steer a couple board members away from is trying to do the big sit down gala dinner, because one, I don't think that we'd be able to recoup most of our costs there, because it is exponentially so much more. Two, it would take so much more time. And three, our constituents and our audiences tend to be, LGBTQ plus activists, retired activists, folks who are of the community, and some of them might be, what's the term, house poor. Some of them might have a house in Newton. Most of them don't. And so I think we're sitting in a good place right here. So yeah, so that was very helpful to hear, because now I can take this back and say, in the experience of other organizations, if we had staff, if we were Harvard, that would be different, but we are not. And the comments from Tracy's question about having a small kind of event that's part, I think, fundraising and also stewardship of new donors is something we're trying out too. We're planning to have like a 12-person dinner that involves a tour of our archives and our collections, and then a dinner. And one of our board members is going to host it. So the cost is just staff time, that's not bad. And we'll really see, if that can be a new avenue for us to really steward some of our larger donors in a more personalized way. So anyway, thank you so much for answering my question. This has been a really helpful morning.
Yeah, you're welcome, Joan. And I think that dinner makes a lot of sense. And one thing that Lenny Zakim Fund is doing. So last September, we had our second Untold Stories event. And that was our first in-person event in quite some time. And while we recognize that people loved being with each other, the revenue was not what we had hoped. And for our staff, we are, like you, a very small staff. And so what we realized, and like 2 months later, we had or actually about a month and a half later, we had our traditional no-show ball, which is essentially, we send out a printed invitation inviting people to make gifts or sponsor an event that's in name only. And so it's something that we've been doing, I think, since we were started. And people really love that concept. So the cost for us to do that is simply the mailing of the invitation and then outreach to people. So we're not, we're not doing the renting of the hotel ballroom and the food and all that sort of stuff. And so essentially 100% of the money goes to our organization, and our donors like that. So what we were finding is between Untold Stories and then a few weeks later, No Show Ball, we're hitting people up, the same people up for money twice. And there's various reasons why we had to have the Untold Stories event when we did, which I won't get into. And so I decided, like, we can't keep doing this. We're cannibalizing our donor base, and our donors haven't caught on to, they like the Untold Stories event, but haven't caught in terms of like learning about the organizations or the people who are featured, but they're not excited enough to give large amounts of money to support it. So let's move away from that and do smaller house party events. And for me, just to sit down with somebody for an hour is a much better use of my time. And I don't necessarily always ask for money, but it depends on when their most recent gift was. Sometimes my conversations are really more about saying thank you, and here's what we're doing. And people appreciate that. And that those meetings sometimes have resulted in gifts that I wasn't expecting. But what I recognize is that just having an event doesn't mean people feel like they came away feeling informed and feeling as engaged as if I sat down with them. So again, Joan, this idea of a small dinner that you're doing is like really spot on. And you have to know your audience. And if your donor base is going to be people from the LGBTQ plus community, some people are going to have more resources than others, but again, you need to know your audience. And so it sounds like you're doing that. Doug.
Sure. Yeah. Let me, I work with a small charity that we support people that have had spinal cord injuries. We've got a gala coming up in 2.5 weeks, and we're pretty excited about it. And just for background, we did it. We've always done a gala until COVID, and it funded 40 to 50% of our revenue needs. So it was a big event for us. During COVID, we did 2 virtual galas. The first one, both about an hour and 10 minutes long. First one was great. We almost matched the revenue of the physical gala. The second one, I think, kind of ran out of gas a little bit. People were a little bit tired of it. We then did a couple of car shows, which we'd never done before, get people outside and safe. And they were, well attended, but not effective fundraising. And so we're going to do a gala. We're expecting 150 people, and we're, of those 150, we've got about probably 115 paid customers and about 35 comp tickets for guests and people that have helped us and that type of thing. It'll cost us probably somewhere between 16 and 18 grand. And we hope to raise 40 to 50 grand total. So we'll make, we'll be in that 40 cents a dollar cost of funds. We've been a little bit surprised. The sponsor reaction has been very positive. And we were a little worried about attendance, and we've had a good influx in the last week or two of attendees. So we're looking forward to it. The one thing that has struck me a little bit as surprising is the hotel that we're having it at, and their vendors seem to be gouging us a little bit. We didn't have to pay for the banquet hall in the past. Now we got to pay $2,000. We didn't have to pay for a stage, and most of our community's in wheelchairs, so we need a ramp to the stage. So that's extra. The audio equipment is pretty expensive. So that's from other, past physical galas. That's been kind of my observations going into it. But the one thing we haven't mentioned is, which is really important to us, is the social value of getting people together, because our community is tends to be a little bit isolated, and they don't get a chance to get out and see other people that they've seen them on Zoom now for 3 years, but they haven't met them in person. So there's a huge value for us for the social aspect as well as the fundraising. So that's important to us. And I think all of us, we've got a very small niche of deep pockets that are supporting us, and we need to make sure we cultivate them and get them there. And so far we've been fortunate enough to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you for sharing, Doug. I know when I saw you at the award ceremony, you mentioned that you're having an event in, I guess it'll be late March. And I'm glad to hear that the attendance and as well as your fundraising is going to meet your expectations. And I am sorry to hear that the venue is not being as hospitable as they have been in the past. I did find with the award ceremony we did, and then our event last September, since we had hired a videographer to do some work for us, I asked him to be my point person in negotiating the audiovisual contract, because I felt he could really cut to it, and he was able to cut down the cost fairly significantly, knowing what we were going to do in that space. I do trying to think, and I guess it's unfortunately probably too late with regard to the room rental or on how to recoup that. But I unless you decide to say to them, if it's your intention of hosting this event again, to say we would love to do it here next year, but felt a little taken advantage of, and maybe that's your opportunity to get them to be more considerate in terms of the costs.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And while you just mentioned a videographer, we're looking for one, because our entertainment portion of the event is live storytelling of two people that have were injured and came back, and they're being kind of professionally coached to tell their stories. But if I can reach you offline, but I'd love to get the name of your videographer to see if he might be available that night. And
yeah. Yes, I've worked with DJ several times. He's great, and he has a way of doing capturing video and storytelling. Although this will be really just video recording at the event, but he could definitely do that. And then his colleague Jordan, who helped us out more recently. I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years as well. They're both great. So I'm happy to provide you with their names.
Great, thank you. I'll reach out. Thank you.
And I will also comment, Doug, your comment about needing to be with one another and being community, especially for people who haven't met in person due to COVID, and especially for those who have physical limitations. That's real, and it's something that trying to figure out how to make that happen and do it in a cost effective way. So we, I would say for us as an organization, we haven't solved for, if we do these smaller house party events, that also means we're not bringing our entire community together other than the award ceremony for us. So that is something that we need to think about.
And I did like the event you put on. It was 2 hours in length. It was moved right along. I thought it was great. And ours is going to last like 4 hours with silent auction and all that stuff, which it's long, which is a problem. But
one thing I did want to share with all of you, and I hope this will help in terms of bringing visibility to all of your organizations and the important work that you're doing in your communities, is my colleague Sophia, who's on Zoom here today. She's our first Northeastern Co-op student, and I have her working on a project we're calling our mapping project, where we're going to take all the organizations that we have funded since 1995 and collect your addresses and websites, and then put that on a map of Massachusetts, color-coded by funding area, but to allow us to share with our community and for you all to utilize as well in terms of time of the work that we're doing. But as an extension of that, my goal is for Lenny Zacob Fund to try and host gatherings, informal gatherings in different parts of the Commonwealth. So for our, for example, our organizations that we've supported up on the North Shore, Tracy, to bring Cape Ann Art Haven and others together. So you know one another, but also to communicate that or promote that gathering to our broader community. Because we know we have donors up there. We know we've got connections to other funders up there, and feel it's important that they know that you all exist and what important work you're doing. So that's something that we're hoping to start to roll out later on this year and do on a regular basis. So again, hopefully that's bringing visibility to your organizations, and hopefully donors will get excited, or prospective donors will get excited by what you all are doing and want to be supportive. So stay tuned about that. Juliet, I just want to acknowledge and thank you for putting in the comments your experiences with the event that you did. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but I welcome that. And in terms of to Juliet and Cindy's questions about like naming what a dialogue dinner could be named, certainly something that like a word or a phrase that's really relevant to your organization, I think certainly works well. And those I would say should be really well orchestrated and tightly scripted from a time perspective. so that people know, okay, if I'm being invited to this, what is this? What is expected of me? And to be really direct, it's not a solicitation. It's really about coming together to talk about an issue of that is concern for Africana Waltham and how we're addressing that. You might find if there's somebody who is either in your community or outside of your community, but doing similar work. Maybe it's a professor at a college or something, some person who could come and be a featured speaker alongside you as the executive director or leader of your organization to help further educate. An example of something that Resilient Sisterhood Project, which is a former grantee partner of ours, is doing. They are hosting a art exhibit. They had commissioned some art to be done that depicts this individual who is identified as the father of modern gynecology and experimented on enslaved women. So she commissioned some artwork and then is looking to do a post-event reception, inviting doctors who are in the practice in the field of gynecology to talk about what they are experiencing, witnessing modern day, and helping to just raise consciousness and understanding about topics around gynecology and women of color. And so that's just, again, an example of something that she's working on. And so is there other things that are out there that you all might be doing to be creative? Mindy, see your hand up.
Hi, everyone. Somebody had mentioned in the chat, like, what are some names to give for these kind of like small or intimate gatherings. One thing that's happening for us is what we're calling cocktails and conversation. And someone is hosting that, has invited like 60 friends. It looks like 40 folks will show up. I'll have a little time to, I also had the opportunity to invite some of my board members, a couple of the students that we serve so they can be in the crowd. And, people that I've talked to recently that are interested in learning more. So like I have a small invitation list of people that I'm inviting. Clearly my friend who's putting this on has just like a group of people that she identifies as like really successful that we're going to go ahead and invite. The other piece of it is that we're not going to make a direct ask of money during this event. And we're calling it like conversation and cocktails / a friend raiser rather than a fundraiser, and really just encouraging people to come out and listen to what it is that we're doing and talk to them about ways that they can be involved. So, ways that they can be involved besides writing a check are like, do you work somewhere that is willing to host a career trip for our students? Do you work somewhere where they would be open to being a corporate partner? So we have like a short list of ways that people can engage, and we're going to ask for them to like follow up. I think it's always important when people go to these events that there's like a handout or a postcard, something that they can leave with and follow up with. On that postcard, we will have a QR code that will bring you directly to the donation page. But in talking to a couple of my friends who are going to this event, who go to many of these events, all of them kind of said the same thing, where it's like, we don't like to feel the pressure of like, we're going to this event, we have to give. But we are open to going to this event to learn more and being able to walk away and decide like, this aligns with something that I'm passionate about, or you know what, it doesn't align so much for me, but I have this other person that I think could be interested. And I think if you can be really strategic and reach out to your current donor base and reach out to 4 to 5 people and say, hey, would you be open to hosting something at your house? Inviting some of, folks in your community that you think would be passionate about this. I can invite like a small group. Typically, whoever's hosting it will pay for it. It's something you're not coming out of pocket for. And it's a very small lift on, folks on your team that would be working to do that. And like, this has come up a couple of times, but for us at the Upward Project, we have had our most success in donors and the relationships that we're building over time, rather than having like, a specific event. Allison spoke to just the follow-up that needs to occur after these events. And, once people made their like year of, end of year giving, I made sure to follow up on a one-on-one basis in person with all of our, high capacity donors. And because they just gave, I wasn't making a specific ask. It was like, thank you for supporting us. This is how your investment is gonna like help us. This is what we're looking to do moving forward. And from some of those, there were some folks that made some, up to their commitment for, the following year. People appreciate the like personal touch, because if there's one thing I've learned is that, you want your donor base to hear from you a couple of times in multiple ways without it being set up such that the only times you're engaging with them are when you're asking for money. And so I just think people really appreciate a personalized touch where you're not always asking for money, but keeping them informed. So those are just a couple of my thoughts at like what has worked for us.
Thank you, Mindy. I think the wonderful thread through all of your comments is about relationship building and not about the transaction of raising or securing a gift from somebody because they went to an event. And so thank you. Heather, did you have a question?
No, I'm good. I'm just kind of processing all of the comments. I'm just kind of mulling over everything. I do have though, well, I noticed that somebody has their hand up, so I'll let that person go.
Okay. Juliet, hello.
Hi, everyone. This is a great conversation. Thank you so much. Like I said in the chat that it's hard to fundraise from the people you serve. But it's very important to also, for us here, I am among the people I serve. So I need almost everything that I'm getting for my people. So it's also hard for us to find the funders because we don't know where they find funders. I don't know whether that makes sense, but it's a real thing. We have great stories, and actually it's like when you have a shop and it has the items to sell and you don't have clients. So we have the stories, I feel like we have that stuff, but how do we find an audience to listen to the stuff that we have? And when you mentioned about that dinner, I find it a great idea, but I need to learn, how do I phrase that letter? That I have a couple of people that I've now gotten to know, because over the 2 years I've been in training through Lenny Zakim. So I'm learning to go meet people. That is a great thing. But now I'm going to that level of like starting to go and make the ask. But I need also a little bit of tips on how do I write that letter. I like the ideas from Mindy when she said something about how you keep track on people, but with a small staff, a team of staff members, and I'm the only one who is learning the stuff. I also need I need more skilled people for some things, skilled in the area of fundraising, skilled. So I don't know if that's a lot of stuff that I'm saying, but I'm saying I would like to do that. I would like to move that level, but how do I really move that level when I'm among the people I'm serving? Yeah.
I'm just waiting for Michael to. Thank you. So thank you, Juliet. A few thoughts. One, so given your location in Waltham, but then also your proximity to other neighboring communities, thinking of who is in those communities, who's starting at the, I would say, macro level or higher level and going to the smaller level, whether it's companies, churches, other resources. I think of an organization like the Sudbury Foundation, which is located in Sudbury, but serves that community. Could be a good place for you to, if not reach out to ask if, or to see if you might be eligible for funding from them. It's also a good way to look at who's supporting the Sudbury Foundation. And are there people on that list that could be potential supporters or donors interested in Africana Waltham? So a large part of that is, and this is largely because we all, or a number of us, are supporting people who are not necessarily in a position to philanthropically support the organization. We don't have natural pipeline of donors, unlike, if you worked for Harvard University. I know somebody mentioned Harvard earlier. Harvard every year has an influx of students and parents, and some people come with money. And so you're always going to have those loyal alumni. So in our case, we're really challenged and tasked with really identifying who's within our immediate community, but also surrounding community who could be supportive. So I would even look at what are the various companies in and around the Waltham area, and looking at the leadership of those companies, and to see, might not necessarily be an African-American person who works for a company who's going to be interested in supporting your work. It could be another ally, but finding those people, sending letters of introduction, figuring ways to expose them to your work. And I'm happy to help you think about what a letter looks like.
Can I add something?
Mhm.
This is Heather.
Mhm.
Thank you. This has been great. This webinar has been really great. I'm learning a lot, and I've gotten some tips. So this is all really great. I just wanted to throw out one idea. I'm still learning about this, but there's something called community. One second, please, for the interpreter. CCF. Spell again for the interpreter. It's community-centric funding. And I'm learning about this, and this is a great resource. It's really kind of supporting a specific community through other nonprofit organizations. and it really focuses on people of a specific group. Often it's a marginalized group. But if you look up CCF, that might be a resource that can be helpful. Our organization is starting to kind of shift towards that model or that kind of idea for our fundraising. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention to people. The other thing is regarding a dinner or something. That sounds like a great idea. For myself, I recently hosted a small event just last week, actually, and I got about $400 or so. It wasn't a lot, but it was a very simple thing to do, and it really was great. We had a bunch of deaf people come. A bunch of our vendors were willing to work with us and help out with this, and we got a bunch of donations. So it was just a few hours, and we got some money out of that. So that idea of the dinners are really good. That was successful for us.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Especially for the resource CCF. And one thing I would also say would be really a good investment of time is to find giving circles in your communities. And there are a number of women's giving circles. I'm completely blanking on the one that's here in Boston. The Philanthropy Connection. Yeah, thank you. And so not only looking to them for fundraising, for gifts, but also looking to, I think that they do host gatherings where prospective organizations looking for funding can go and interact. Because I feel like that is a great way for you to get the word out about your organization. And even if you don't get funding necessarily from the Philanthropy Connection or other giving circles, there are people within those circles who do have capacity to make gifts. I feel in a number of cases, you've got individuals who have capacity, but they're afraid of, they want to be under the radar. So they might start by Mindy, thank you. They might start by participating in a giving circle to learn about the work that's going on in the community and make a small gift that way. And then as they get more familiar with the organizations out there that are of interest to them, then they might make gifts directly to the organizations. But that's a good suggestion. So I know we're at 11, and I want to thank you all for your time. Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. And so we have this recording. We'll make that available to you all to watch should you have any other questions. And the other thing I will say is on June 16th, we are having an all-day institute around fundraising. So while we're not necessarily going to revisit event fundraising, we'll talk about some other things that we talked about during this session today, which I think will be helpful to you all in your organizations, because we need to think about fundraising as holistic. And the event is planning to be in person in Boston. So we'll be sending out information about that shortly, but it will be held at the Nonprofit Center near South Station, if any of you are familiar with that, where that's located. So again, thank you all. It's good to see everybody, and I'm sorry we couldn't be in person, but I don't know if the sun's out where you are, but it is here. So I wish you all a beautiful day. Okay, thank you. Take care.